Hello, welcome to the workshop number 1 of the SIAH, Housing Finance and Policy. Our speaker for this workshop, they will talk about the role of the housing finance and policy in the developing sustainable, innovative, affordable housing in Africa. Our three speakers are Ms. Jackie Sampson, Head of the Department of the Human Settlements, Western Cape Government, Ms. Kesia Ross, Executive Director, Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa, and Mr. Fabio Company, Head of Construction Management, City of Cape Town.
It's recording, and yes, can you see my screen? Okay, sure. So, Sustainable, Innovative, Affordable Housing Initiative aim to develop interdisciplinary network and participation worldwide to respond effectively to complex housing challenges in Africa. Everybody, we know the challenges in housing, especially affordable housing in Africa. We know the quality of the affordable housing. We know the very long queue and those backlog, which we estimated 115 million houses backlog for the Africa. Only 13% of the people, they have access to the affordable housing. And at the end of this queue, the low quality, even the brand new affordable housing, which you can see in the picture in the right side, is just a serious problem or the challenges. Situation or the pandemic of the COVID, he just amplified the situation and problem with the especially informal settlement and those people they living in the informal settlements. So we just try to come together to solve this problem. So the rationale for the SIAH project stemmed from the view that the complex multidisciplinary perpetual challenge cannot solve by expert professional and the policymaker working away in the silo. So we need to just come together to just share the knowledge and expertise to just solve all these complex problems. SIAH will improve and empower the local stakeholder and the community to redevelop and improve habitat, infrastructure, and the service condition of the affordable housing. So we just try to bring all the stakeholders of the housing together, no matter what is the background, no matter what is the field of the person, just working together as an engineer, architect, social scientist, environmentalist. They just put it together and just found the solution to these challenges. This interaction and this collaboration will give us that kind of potential, like modern methods, new material, and innovative technology, such as resilience, inclusive and passive design, life cycle assessment, circular economy, and the cyber innovation technology to address these challenges. And we just try to expand this opportunity to whole global South. Very briefly, the object for the SIAH is just establishing an interdisciplinary platform for the African housing stakeholder to share knowledge and expertise as I explain it. The other objective is introduce the latest innovation technology and techniques such as new houses material, modern method, and their technical, economical, social, environment properties to African housing stakeholder. Also, we just try to train the next generation of African researchers, innovators, and collaborative problem solvers. And the last objective for the SIAH is just engender technology transfer and capacity development between the African academics and industry sectors. So we just try to make a bridge between the academic and professional and the developers. So these three people or these three group of people, they can just work together, not in the silo anymore to solve this problem. SIAH just try directly or indirectly address and tackle the following 12 sustainable development goals of the United Nations. So we just try to improve the good health and well-being. We just try to improve the quality of the education through the sharing knowledge and expertise. We just try to improve the gender equality. We just try to address clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reduce inequality, especially in the informal settlements, sustainable cities and community, responsible consumption and production to using some like a circular economy, climate change, and very important, or the last things, partnership for the goal, which is just developing a sustainable, innovative, affordable housing for Africa. SIAH, founded by the Royal Academy of Engineering in UK and sponsored by the University of the Cape Town, NHBRC and Agrima, South Africa, and is hosted by the Sustainability-Oriented Cyber Research Unit for the Building Environment, which we call it SQ. As of now, SIAH partnered with the more than 20 institution, government, and agency worldwide. So you can see some of the logo here, and I really appreciate all these partners. They just gave us excellent support to just run this workshop, the forum, and the competition, which I just explain it in the next slide. So some of the activity, we just try to do it in the SIAH. The first thing is just providing that platform. So we have a forum. The forum has 5 categories: housing, finance and policy. In the left side, you can see these categories here: housing design, housing construction, housing environment, housing social and well-being. So we just try to hold at least one workshop in the series 1. And later we just found the main problem, go deeper to that problem. And participants in the SIAH, they can just easily come and just post their question, issue, problem, or experience. And the other person, they can just read it or share some comments or just respond to that question, as you see in the screenshot in the right side. So this is like a forum is just picking the activity little by little. The other activity we have it is just a series of the workshop. For this first series of the workshop, we just organized 6 workshops, which this is the first one. The second one will hold on March 3, and the next is in March 10, is already open for the registration, and I just put the link for your registration. So the next workshop is just focused on the housing design workshop, and the next one is just housing market in South Africa, especially the case study of the Cape Town. And the last activity, we just try to do it. We just try to open the SIAH design competition, which will be opened early in March 2021. All the students, all the researchers, all the practitioners, all the professionals in the housing industry, they are welcome to just make a group and just join us with this competition. The things I can just announce it now, the price for the first winner is just more than 30,000 rand, or is something around 1,000 pounds we have it. And I just try my best to increase the awards. So I'm just negotiating with the partners and sponsors to just increase this award. So this is more or less the activity. We just try to do it with the SIAH platform and the website. For more information, please regularly visit the website, which is the siah-i.com, and just update yourself about the events, workshop, or the maybe some other things we are just coming for you. So this is everything from my side, the very brief introduction to the SIAH, and back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Ali. Okay, so without further ado, we have 3 speakers today, and we'll start with Jackie Sampson. So the idea is that I will post their wonderful CVs onto the chat, and I'll hand over the mic to Jackie to introduce herself as well. Thank you, Jackie.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm broadcasting live from Cape Town International Airport, so if there's some disturbances, I do apologize. I am the head of department of Western Cape Department of Human Settlements. I am an urban planner by profession, so I bring that expertise to the planning and implementation of human settlements within the Western Cape. I advocate for sustainable development, sustainability in the provision of the type of products, and the sustainability for the receiving community or beneficiaries. So at the end of the day, we'd like to see an improved product and housing opportunity. And our focus is obviously on the lower income. And our department has also reshifted or shifted their delivery model more geared towards what we label as affordable housing, and that's the income level, household income up to 22,000 Rand per month. And we've developed tools and systems, we've adapted our policy, and we acknowledge that the delivery in that sector, for that sector, is largely reliant on partnerships and contributions of entities outside government. So what I'll present today is to look at how we can enable and advance those partnerships, and how we can then encourage broader participation from private entities, corporates, communities themselves in the delivery of affordable housing. Thank you.
Jackie, do you want to proceed with your presentation to just using the more time?
Yes, I'll proceed. I'll upload it now.
Thank you very much.
Can you all see the presentation?
Yes, we can see.
Thank you. So I will focus on what we label as affordable housing. And just to remind you, it's the household income up to 22,000 per month. And for today's presentation, we looked at what are the key concerns and questions asked from business, the sector, municipalities, communities themselves. And so we're looking at sustainable approaches in the design and layout of an affordable housing project. We also acknowledge that this type of delivery or housing opportunity is vested within a broader human settlement or broader urban planning environment. We also look, and it is a concern even for us that's in government, the planning processes and the different legislation that we have to apply, and how that also impacts on the delivery of affordable housing. Often people want to expedite, but it's my view is it's best to plan properly so that the implementation is smooth. But we also acknowledge that time is money, so we don't want to be faced with bureaucratic systems and red tape when delivering any housing opportunity. We also look at supply levers that are designed to generate new opportunities, and that is then encouraging participation of other sector, whether it's private sector, environmentalists, corporates, employers that want to participate in this value chain. And so how do we use our assets? And often we have land parcels that we can release to the private sector that enables the development for our market, and also acknowledging that maybe it's better for private sector to provide those opportunities. Then there's also always from government side, people see government as a barrier, but we want to be an enabler. So we looked at our policies and both planning and implementation, and how can we adjust and adapt that to reduce those barriers and just reduce that regulatory constraints that we are faced with. I'll talk to some of the tools that we've developed and implemented successfully. We also look at preserving and offsetting the loss of, we shouldn't say low cost housing, but more low income housing, because the cost is certainly not low. So we look at preserving, if we do provide for the affordable housing market, that it's preserved for that category of income earners, and that it's not lost, for example, due to gentrification or people just selling off to make a quick buck, but it's seen as a sustainable housing opportunity for those beneficiaries. Then we look at incentives to encourage new affordable housing, so enabling new entries and stock in the market, because we often find currently that there's a resale of fully subsidized or RDP or BNG housing, and that is then sold into the affordable housing market. So we look at the supply by the private sector and how it can then assist us in creating those opportunities for the below 22,000 income. And then, of course, looking at levers for securing the dedicated affordable housing and development. So we're looking at, for example, the inclusionary housing. How can you ensure that there's a minimum or a quota provided within a bigger development, whether it's a full-on private sector or subsidized housing development? So we also then look at how we can ensure that that is incorporated and provided for in the bigger development. And then to move on to sustainability, it's key to any development. So we work jointly in with the three spheres of government, and recently National Department of Human Settlements released new directives and looking at higher densities. It's part of the just the direction we are moving into, and we know that that is key for sustainability and achieving economies of scale. Us as a provincial department, we get a allocation from national department, and in turn we allocate that to municipalities for implementation of human settlements, and then we use that as a lever also to influence that business plan and what projects are selected at municipal level. Then of course finance is a key part of delivery. So within our subsidy regime we have two subsidy programs, one being the finance-linked individual subsidy program. This is a partial or proportional subsidy that we as government provide. Obviously, you have to qualify the certain criteria for 35 to 22,000 income, and it's provided at a sliding scale. And this is often just used as it could be a deposit or just more than a deposit, and then the balance of the cost of the house must then be obtained through a bond. We also know what the constraints are there, and I'll talk to tools later on how we're assisting that market. And then we have social housing. So the FLISP market is for ownership. You transfer the property to the end user. And then we have social housing, which is a form of rental for up to 15,000 income. We also provide different grants, but the private sector plays a very, very big role, especially through the social housing institutions to provide for that market. Then we look at the regulatory environment. So even when we bring in new products, it has to adhere to, for example, SANS 10, 14, 400. It must comply with the housing code in regard to specific specs and norms and standards, national building regulations. The NHBRC is our regulator just to approve the unit, the building plan. And it also then includes Agrima SA, where we're looking at alternate building technology or alternate building methods. And so Agrima SA plays a big role in that. And then, of course, from Western Cape Government, we also provide minimum standards just to enhance and improve the delivery in that sector. Energy efficacy. So what we've introduced in our as a human settlement sector, there's also minimum standards or minimum requirements, and the 10,400 SANS requirements are at play here. So we're looking at hot water supply. Before there was no hot water supply, so we're looking at that just at least 50%. And then in parallel to that, you look at alternate building technology and look at solar panel geysers and other forms of energy creation also. Insulating pipes and geysers also to improve the energy efficiency of that unit. So the usage of that within the building envelope, that's what they call the actual unit, and how the energy is preserved and more effectively utilized through the design and whatever elements you also put in place. So I'm not going to go into detail, but there is already advances made in that just to improve the energy efficiency of a unit and to make it also more comfortable to live in. We, of course, do advocate for integrated planning, and that is not just having a sterile dormitory town, but looking at all the other elements that contributes to a human settlement. So it's sustainability in the types of uses, and then access to opportunities, whether it be through public transport or provided for in the development. So it's an environment where you can live, learn, play, work within that environment, so you don't have to go out for those other uses that makes up an urban living environment. We're looking at promoting densification, and we're also looking at minimum densification, and that was implemented rigorously in our new business plan for our new financial year 21-22. We also look at the spread of tenure options, so whether it's ownership, sectional title, rental, and then there's different forms of rentals also. And we've also introduced tools such as rent to own or rent to buy, for those who can't afford to buy outright. So you can rent to eventually own, or you rent to and pay a balloon balance at the end, and then you own the property. So we also look at moving away just from your conventional subsidized housing, one house, one family, looking at increasing the densities, what the cost benefit analysis are of that. But I think more importantly, through engagement with the community, we also adjust and adapt our products and our delivery to address the needs of a particular community, because we acknowledge that each community is different. Then we have the priority housing development areas that is gazetted, and that is where our catalytic projects, and there we also look at mixed use development, look at mass supply of housing to enable it to attract other investment, and then also where we can benefit from the economy of scale of larger developments. Green building layouts, and that is looking at the actual layout of the entire development, but also, as I spoke to earlier, the layout, the detailed design of the unit itself. And then there's also minimum requirements. So when we design a layout, we're not just going to look at the layout plan, but we also look at how you place the units within that layout plan, so that you can then provide maximum light and sunlight, natural light, looking at energy efficiency, benefiting from north facing, for example. So there's different aspects that we want included when we do our layout planning to enable improvement in building design and the placement of those buildings on each for each property. We're also looking at minimum densities for each development, and we also acknowledge that within the metro and the non-metro areas, there's a different approach, but we can't shy away from the fact that higher densities can create more efficiencies, but we also want to provide that within the context of an integrated development. Oops, sorry. Building design. Okay, so this is an interesting approach that we've started. So we also assess the performance of our units and how it subscribes to green buildings and energy efficiencies. So we looked at some of the aspects that can enhance that, looking at semi-detached or row houses as opposed to freestanding units that obviously also assist with increased densities. I spoke about north facing and orientation of the building. Enabling natural light, sunlight and heat, and also then looking at the different seasons and how the unit then also assists, especially in Cape Town with our heavy rainfall during winter, and then optimizing through gutters and so forth, capturing rain. So there's different approaches that we've applied, and we also then indicated minimum alternate energy provision for each unit, and that can include in your solar, water heaters, photovoltaic system, alternate cooking systems, wind turbines, gas as opposed to electricity, and we know we can't fully rely on our electrical supply, so we have to look at alternate ways of providing energy and heat. Then the aim of this was to just improve, obviously, the quality of the unit, but I think most importantly, it must reduce the cost for the end user. so they don't have as high electricity bills or water bills. Of course, energy efficiency and the contribution of that to the environment and improving just the performance of the unit, that it doesn't have a negative impact on the environment, the use of new materials or building methods. And at the end of the day, we want faster delivery. So if sustainable building or alternate building methods or materials can assist with that, we'll do that. But I think added to that, we must also enable the end user to extend their house effectively and efficiently without relying on a specific supplier for that alternate building technology. So when we talk about sustainable building technology, it must be, we must be able to replicate it, and it must be easy for the end user to use, to extend or new build. This is very detailed of the green procurement initiatives, which we started in 2016. As I said, we analyzed the performance of our own buildings. We then went through a awareness raising campaign so that officials in municipalities, contractors, building contractors, and other stakeholders involved in this delivery can then just re-look at how we design, especially, and provide for affordable housing. We then included in 2018 already green procurement implementation in our housing projects, and in the tender for the appointment of service providers, being the construction companies, we looked at tender functionality criteria to allow the minimum norms and standards so that the unit is a more green product, let's call it that, and performs better in terms of sustainable energy. We've also, through EDGE, the Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiency, we went on a training course. Some of our officials and municipal officials went through a training course so that they can then assess these buildings when they do inspections and sign off on the completion of buildings, on completed buildings. They then have the capability to then assess the performance of the buildings. Just got one or two slides left. And then, of course, the best way to promote any new system or new approach is then to pilot it and showcase it. And so we've in 2019-20, we've then identified a project within the metro where we can implement this. So that was effectively implemented, where it showcases 20% less water usage and 20% less embodied energy. So the materials itself also then reduces the cost and utility costs for the end user, and that is very, very important to us. And that will then be mainstreamed and rolled out in new developments. Partnerships, as I indicated, we know that we can't do this on our own. So we want to increase our visibility and then delivery through building sustainable relationships. We understand that the value chain in delivery also then includes many different players. We looked at resource mobilization to enhance delivery. So how do you then get resource from private sector, and how can you then bring them on board for the delivery, that there's a reduced reliance on government? Housing Consumer Readiness Program was introduced because we acknowledge that other than the stock in the market, there isn't units that's available at a cost that's affordable to people. We also know that the credit worthiness of people are highly indebted. They spend money on other things instead of securing shelter for themselves. So we've launched a housing consumer education where we take we screen potential beneficiaries, particularly in those areas where we deliver affordable housing, and we go, the bank then pre-screens them and looks at the affordability and what they will qualify for, and then we take them through a process to increase their credit readiness, or then and increases the opportunity to access funding. And in parallel to that, then we deliver or build products that is then within that affordability market for them. So maximum 400,000 we found is then what can be what is affordable for this market, but we also acknowledge that in certain areas a unit of 250,000 is affordable, and we know that's not easily attainable or available in the market other than your subsidized housing that's being resold. So obviously through our systems and our tools and our policies, we want to create an enabling environment, and we have successfully also partnered with entities, private entities, to enable that partnership. We also look at, we have a, it must be, all our decision making must be informed by data. So we look at property market analysis and our research. It's evidence-based delivery. So we use information that's out there also to assist us in our planning and implementation. And then the partnerships. We acknowledge external partnerships. We've established a body within the department because we do get approached from everyone. They've got this silver bullet and they've got the solution for human settlements, and their product is the best and they're the sole providers. So we have an internal what we call partnership exco, but it is a governance entity to ensure that we don't give preferential treatment to suppliers, so that we follow that process also. But we want to encourage partnerships, and we encourage people to table or provide information or just attempt to partner with us in any shape or form. We will respond to that. So we invite people also if they have products or systems that can assist. And then we've got a database, and we also, to guide the management of partnerships, we provided systems internally just for us to be able to pre-screen any potential partner. So we've got the documentation and the systems, and then we also develop standard operating procedures with feasibilities just to assess potential partnerships. And we currently have 3 active employer-assisted partnerships, especially in the agricultural sector, where the farm owners have either given funding for houses for their employees or provided land, or other resources were provided. Thank you. There's different criteria used. I can make that available, and I know that the presentation will be made available, so I'm not going to go into detail, but fair enough to say that we do assess each one with a specific criteria that we apply. Thank you. Again, furthermore, thank you. So I hope I've captured some of the just the essence of our approach for affordable housing, and that is just to create that partnership to provide sustainable solutions through the design, as well as reduce the end user cost in our unit design and supply. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Ali, we're holding questions over to the end, is that correct?
Yes, we are just
Okay.
go for the presentation, then Q&A at the end.
All right, so is it Kessia? Sorry if my pronunciation is incorrect. The floor is yours, and I'll post your resume in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ali, for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak with all of you today. I think it's very exciting, the formation of this group and the opportunity to exchange between ourselves. And there's lots going on in this country and then actually across the continent. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both. I'll start with a broad view and then some examples relating to South Africa as well. I'm mindful a little bit of time, so we'll go through this as quickly as possible. And Ali or Karen, please interrupt me if I go on a bit. Sure. Let me just share my screen. Here we go. And then put it into slide view so you can see it properly. Okay, can you see? Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. Okay, so thanks again. And my name's Kessia Rust, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa. We're based in Johannesburg, so just up the road from you. And our overall mission is to build the information infrastructure to support investment in affordable housing across Africa. That's what we do. We were set up, we're an independent think tank set up with donor funding. Our primary donor at the moment is the French Development Agency, AFD. We've been supported for the past 6 years also by FSD Africa, and then a range of other organizations. And in addition to that, we are the Secretariat for the African Union for Housing Finance. The AUHF is an industry body, which is comprises at the moment 38 members from 17, 18 countries across the continent, and to explicitly focus on the development of affordable housing markets across the continent. So I promised Ali that I would talk a little bit just as an overview of Africa's affordable housing markets. And most of what I'm going to talk about comes out of a yearbook which we produce and release every November at the occasion of the AUHF annual conference. Last year, that conference was held virtually, as everything is these days. And the recordings from that are all available on YouTube under the AUHF's YouTube channel. And I would recommend looking at those because many of them I think would be of interest to SIAH. The yearbook itself is an effort that we've now undertaken 11 times, and this year will be our 12th year, where we try to capture for every single country in this continent 4 pages of detail on how do the housing markets work in those countries. And the yearbook is available for download on our website, and I've got the address here. So I'm going to talk broadly about housing markets, and then I think the thing that's on top of all of our minds, or underneath our minds, in our minds, is COVID-19, and how do we engage with that from a housing perspective, and taking a look at where some of the opportunities are to really engage with this market and the imperatives that we face and a way forward. So one of the things that CAF does every year with its yearbook is the way in which we produce the yearbook is we commission consultants in almost every country. So last year we worked with 45 consultants. So in some cases, someone would write two profiles. But basically 45 consultants we worked with to get them to write about the current situation in their country. And one of the questions that we asked them to answer is, what is the price of the cheapest newly built house in your country, built by a formal developer and available on the market today? And so this graph is showing the gray bars is the price of the house in 2019, and the orange bars are the price of the house in 2020. And then the little house icon is the size of that house in square meters. Just to take a look at South Africa's, South Africa for me was a really scary one. I was blown away by the price. The price is 538,000 Rand this year. Well, in 2020, it was the price of the cheapest newly built house made by a private sector developer and put onto the market. We can build for cheaper than that, but what the market was providing was something at that price. Across the continent, the price range in the majority of countries, the house is somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000. So we measure this in dollars just so that we have comparative purposes. There are some countries where the cheapest newly built house is less than $20,000, and there's a level of subsidization there. There are a number of countries where it's more than $40,000. And just to get a sense of what is it that developers are building to, and then there's a whole subtext behind this data to think about a little bit more carefully. The other factor relating to housing finance, another indicator that's important to look at in terms of understanding Africa's housing markets, is the prevailing mortgage interest rate and term. And that really is a pretty good indicator of the broader macroeconomic environment. So if you look at the gray bar here, that goes against the scale on the left-hand side of the graph, which is the mortgage interest rate. And basically, you've got mortgage interest rates that are largely greater than 10%. In some cases, look at Guinea, it's 25%. In Zambia, it was what, 35% or so, 33%. I mean, if you have a 33% mortgage interest rate, you might as well be buying your house with your credit card. So this is not a feasible product in that macroeconomic environment. And of course, the interest rate charged is in part set by the bank that's offering the loan, but it's also set by the cost of finance itself, which comes from the central bank, and that's the functioning of the economy. The term that you can get your mortgage for also impacts on affordability. And so there are very many countries where you've got mortgages that are available for 20 years or more, but in a number of places you only have 10-year mortgages. And in some countries, for example, Guinea-Bissau, it's a 5-year mortgage that you can access. So that puts real pressure on household affordability to pay for housing. I should just note that the subsidy program programs that Jackie just outlined, I mean, South Africa is endowed with fabulous resources, and no other country is offering a level of subsidization and a level of government attention to the delivery of affordable housing like South Africa. And we need to remember that, both in terms of understanding what's possible in other countries, and also, I'd like to argue, understanding what's possible in South Africa. Because in other countries, they are managing to deliver a level of affordable housing in different ways, sometimes without government subsidization. So taking that cheapest newly built house price, and then taking the mortgage terms that I presented on the last 2 slides, then what we did is we downloaded data from CGID, which is the Canback Global Income Distribution Database. And it's a global database where they take income data from all over the world, and they adjust it and fix it so that it's comparable. We take that data and we say, okay, if this is the data in urban areas, if this is the income distribution in urban areas, what is the percentage of the population in urban areas that could afford, in principle, to buy the cheapest newly built house with a mortgage at the prevailing rate? So there's a lot of ifs here, because of course there will be exceptions across the board. It's a very rough picture, but this very rough picture is also very depressing, because look at how many countries where the percent of the urban population is less than 50%, which means that it's in the red or pink zone, and in some cases less than 5%. So those are dark red countries. And only a few countries where you have more than 50% in the urban area could afford that cheapest newly built house. Even in South Africa, last year, the cheapest house was $31,321. And that was only affordable to 20% of the urban population. So we really need to get our heads around this. What is being delivered in the private sector at the moment is not affordable to the majority of households in urban areas across the continent. Also, we need to say that the number, what this doesn't say anything about, is the number of houses developed. So the cheapest newly built house on the continent last year was one that was delivered in Nigeria. And that was an $8,040 house, which is affordable, fabulous, to 68% of the population, but they only built 400 of them. So again, we have a problem here that we're not building enough of the affordable units either. If we think about COVID-19 in housing, think about that picture of that map, keep that in your head, and then think about, well, with COVID, we're worried about the health impact of people's housing. So the impact that house has on risk of infection or managing infection and the stigma associated with that, so community-based issues. But then also the impact of the economic situation and the lockdown, which results in declining livelihoods, declining budgets, and deferred investments for everybody. So we need to think about households. They're facing health issues, and those arise from and are exacerbated by poor housing conditions and poor access to water and sanitation. Overcrowding is another important issue to think about around COVID. But then households are also facing financial issues, so their capacity to pay is declining in the context of the loss of livelihoods, the pressures on incomes, and then the increasing costs associated with healthcare and so on that's come from the pandemic. And then there's very real resilience issues. So in many cases, households have been using their savings to deal with their financial situation because their incomes have stopped. And that means that those are being depleted. And then, of course, people are just stressed, whether it's stigma or just the stress of existing in this situation, and that impacts on their ability to participate in the economy. Businesses face very real capacity issues, whether it's that they have declining capacity because people can't come to work or the lockdown has stopped them from coming to work. They face sustainability issues and growth issues. And think about that in terms of your housing supply sector and the ability of developers to continue to operate. In South Africa, a critical issue is the long-term business sustainability of landlords as key deliverers in our affordable housing sector. And then, of course, cities and governments, cities, provincial government, national government, they're facing declining resources, constrained national fiscus, so a decrease in conditional grants. I mean, Jackie and her team can look forward to smaller budgets coming towards them. And then that's going to impact over time over a declining rate space as property values fall, rising financial obligations, failing areas and rental institutions where the household risk is high. And then, of course, that all the extraordinary measures that we're implementing right now, what's the impact going to be in the long term when we try and get back to normal? Is there such thing? So what that ultimately means is that from a risk perspective, as well as a long-term growth and sustainability perspective, quality affordable housing is all the more important. But we have less resources to actually address it. So we need to think quite carefully about housing as not only part of the problem, but also part of the solution. So when we think about that, I think there's three categories, and I know that there's a bit of a policy discussion we're hoping to have today. So policy should be thinking about how do we address the risk related to COVID, but I would say broader health risks and broader livelihoods risks. We just had a cyclone in Mozambique as well. What are the housing risks that happen around there? So there's a lot to think about in terms of risk. We also want to talk about stimulating recovery and then building resilience. And in terms of these three, we've done research in all three areas and have examples that we can share. I've provided the hyperlinks there, and I'll talk about them now. So first, about addressing risk. We definitely need to think quite carefully about people's housing situations. And so often when we think about housing policy, we think someone either is sorted, they have housing, or they're part of the backlog. But in fact, the definition of that backlog is very nuanced. So this is data that we took from the Demographic Health Survey, which is collected by USAID. And what they did is they looked at key housing quality issues in different countries. What I've chosen here is data that is looking just at the bottom 40th percentile of urban dwellers. So in Nigeria, that's 7 million households in the bottom 40th percentile living in urban areas. In Cameroon, it's 1 million households, and in Zambia, it's 600,000 households who are in that category. And of those households in those situations, in Nigeria, 35% of that 7 million are living in informal housing. So the housing, the structure itself is informal. Another 52% on top of that are living without flush toilets, but their housing is formal. So, and then another 5%, they're living in their housing is fine, but they are living in overcrowded dwellings. So the total percentage of households living in potentially inadequate housing is 93%. That's virtually everybody. But of those, only a third of those are in informal housing themselves. The other households, they need interventions from a sanitation perspective, or they need a home improvements issue. They need to grow the size of their dwelling to deal with the number of people in their household. And that means that municipalities can actually think of a differentiated response. It's not that they have to build new housing for 93% of 7 million households. They can actually think of providing sanitation for half of those, providing and then improving the structures of others. Looking at, this is a very complicated slide. Just take a look at it for a bit. What we've done is we've taken UN Habitat data. And gray, light gray is 2010, and 2018 data is in orange. And this is the percentage of households, the proportion of the urban population living in slums. This is the SDG indicator 11.1. So it's pretty high, right? It's like in many countries, it's over 50%. So it is fairly significant if you look across all of this, and it looks like we've got an enormous amount of work to do. In South Africa, we would say here, in South Africa, it's about 25% of the population. Here's South Africa right here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, it's 25%. And in many cases, we might start to say, well, that's our backlog figure. But if we look at the definition that the UN Habitat applies to people living in slums, it's actually got more nuance in it. So the definition by UN Habitat says that it's a group of households living under a single roof in an urban area who lack one or more of the following conditions. So their house is not durable, or they're overcrowded, or they don't have access to safe water, or they don't have access to adequate sanitation, or they have insecure tenure. So any one of those would put you into the classification of a household living in slums. But you can see from a policy perspective, in fact, it's a different intervention to respond to number 5 than it is to respond to number 3. And make it differentiating in terms of what that backlog constitutes is really important in terms of the instrument and the players that you want to add to that, to your solution. So we've done some work looking at the impact of housing on the economy, and it is significant. In South Africa, the impact of housing on the economy was found to be 3.7%. In Nigeria, 7.1% of GDP, in Tanzania, 13.8%, in Uganda, 11%, and so on. And we've got these reports that are available on our website. But what's critical is when you look at the housing value chain from an economic perspective, so that's saying pulling together all of your raw materials and your produced, so that's the primary sector goods up here, and then your secondary sector goods, which would be your manufactured materials and your services, and that becomes your intermediate inputs. And adding labor and the structure and health of companies to that, that gives you your domestic production. And that's how we came up with this number right here. But along this economic value chain for housing, there are certain gaps in each country that can be identified and constraints that give rise to the difference in these numbers. And so what we've developed is recommendations from 1 through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that can be made particular to how the housing sector is functioning as an economic sector in the economy, to try to improve the role of housing in that economy and start to deal with the risk. And when you're dealing with the risk, you're contributing to economic activity, which will grow the contribution of housing to the economy, and that will contribute to your recovery. And that's a critical second thing that we need to focus on when we're thinking about coming out of the COVID pandemic, is using the investment in housing and stimulating housing markets to actually create economic growth, which will contribute to recovery. We can see that in some countries, there have been real interventions that have been made, economic interventions, I'm sorry the slide is so small, that have also contributed to recovery. So a reduction in the policy interest rate, or in South Africa, it's called the repo rate. 12 countries have done that. And you can see here, that's what South Africa has done. Our interest rate went down to 7.5% and then down a little bit further. And that has made an enormous difference in encouraging people to invest in housing. In other countries, they changed some of the way in which they demand liquidity on the part of the banks, or they provided additional supports in terms of people being able to access or deal with the default that was happening. So different measures that were undertaken by central banks in different countries to underpin, to support the functioning of the housing sector during the crisis. Another way of thinking about stimulating housing is, well, what if we did build cheaper houses? And what if we could do that and built them on the market? So I told you earlier that the cheapest house in Africa at the moment is $8,040. It's built by the Millard Fuller Foundation in Abuja. Well, what if we could actually build that everywhere? Given current financing arrangements, how many households would afford? And you can see from, from this graph, the small map of Africa, which is the graph I showed you before, to now this map of Africa, where you can see far many more countries, there are more than 50% of people who can start to afford an $8,000 house. But it's still not universal. In South Africa, only 71% of the population, of the urban population, could even afford to buy an $8,000 house. So get your head around that. And what does that mean then? We need to start thinking about our access to finance, and we need to think about other ways in which we support housing development, which is where that home improvements approach becomes really important, and the opportunities for housing microfinance. The third one relates to resilience. And this again is, this is some work that we've been doing in South Africa. This is a map of Johannesburg. We've done it also for all of the major metros across the continent. And there you're saying, what we're saying is that if people do own property and that property has value, it becomes the basis of their balance sheet, their assets. And then they can use that to either leverage additional capital, or they can use it as savings to support any other investments that they would want to be making. And what we've done here is we've drawn this map of the property values in each neighborhood in Johannesburg. You can hear this area here is an area called Soweto, which is a township. It's understood typically as a low-income area that is south of the major CBD. The CBD is right about here. And you can see it's primarily properties that are between 300 and 600,000 Rand. A number of them green under 300,000 Rand. But some are starting to be worth more. And over time, as the city invests in the infrastructure in this area, property values rise. And that means that the value of a property on a household balance sheet increases. And that is a critical component of their long-term savings. Another way of ensuring resilience is to promote rental and to allow for rental. And this is some work that we did in Tanzania, where we looked at just the distribution of rental prices, the monthly rental going on this graph from $500 per month. So what's that, about 7,500 Rand, all the way through to $9,000 is the top of this scale. And we've mapped it by area to show that in Kimara, which is a suburb of Dar es Salaam, there are a number of properties available at less than $500 a month, would be affordable to a particular market segment. And so for cities and provinces, policymakers to recognize, if we can map against this neighborhood map, well, what's the income distribution of the city of Dar es Salaam? And do we have enough of these lower priced houses to allow for rental for the population that exists? Thinking about risk recovery and resilience really requires a level of collaboration. So the African Union for Housing Finance has been building mechanisms for collaboration between the state and the private sector across its member countries. And in fact, every year, the AUHF produces a declaration. This is a copy of the declaration last year. It's presented in both English and in French. And it struck me that there's a really important opportunity for collaboration between the AUHF and SIAH around this. And SIAH could be a signatory to this declaration, could also distribute the declaration. We'd be very happy to share that, and it is available on the AUHF's website. just as a concluding point, and there's a lot in this slide, and some of you will have heard me say this before, none of this is possible. None of what I've told you is possible. I wouldn't have been able to tell you any of what I've just said if I didn't have the data. That data is critically needed. And I think that we have a culture of data hoarding in the housing sector rather than data sharing. So we've started a data agenda for Africa, and we're promoting this concept of open source data, which we're in the process of implementing at the moment. We've already developed, and this was in partnership with REAL, which is an NGO that's based in the UK, to collect headline indicators. It's a total of about 116 indicators that cover the whole housing delivery value chain. And we've collected those now for 8 countries. It was an enormous exercise, and we really came to understand statutory data supply. So the data that's provided by statutory associations. I know that the NHBRC is a supporter of SIAH, and I have to say that they sit on the most astonishing collection of data by virtue of being required to approve, to register every single house that gets built in South Africa. They should know better than anyone how many houses there are. But the NHBRC does not publish that data right now. Now that's the case across the continent, very difficult to actually get the data. And so we would also like to propose to SIAH and all of its collaborators, please join the Data Agenda for Africa. CAF is going to help put that together in a usable format so that we can all learn from one another to achieve our respective goals. I'm going to stop there and just to say that on our website, there's lots of material. This is just a selection of blogs that we've recently written about COVID and the impact of COVID on the economy in different contexts. And we really do look forward to engaging. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. Yeah, so sorry, in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next presentation. Fabio, if you'd like to start sharing your presentation, and then we can take it from there.
Thanks.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
From my side, good afternoon. I want to thank SSI for the opportunity to do this presentation, as well as to join the forum and see how we can better affordable housing. This afternoon, I will be speaking on human settlements infrastructure needs affecting policy grants and programs. I'm a head of construction management in the urban development unit for City of Cape Town within spatial planning and environment. So welcome. I will attempt to try to bring everything together from the previous speakers, Jackie and Keisha. With no doubt, I am not a policy maker. I am a hybrid or catalyst within the human settlements and the environment, bringing some of practical and policy and as well project management background to it. So my presentation will attempt to understand the affordable housing approach, understand the influence of infrastructure, how infrastructure and policy has influenced grants and programs over the years, as well as what is the 21st century trends and that is emerging within policy and finance with what we're dealing with currently. For me to start off, as the previous, I think Jackie then mentioned that for sustainability and human settlements, I just want to bring a definition into it. As we all know, it dates back to the Vancouver Declaration of 1976, which took housing away from just being a single house, but brought it to human settlements that took apart the entire community, where we would normally view it as a village, town, or a city. And as well, sustainability also date back to the 1987. That is where developments that meets the need and present without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. So thinking about that is what we're doing now, how it will affect the future generation that is to come. And we are thinking about that, and we have incorporated that. just to give a little bit of a higher holistic view of it all, for human settlements project leader, doesn't matter where he's in South Africa or even I think abroad, there's various things that is at play that we need to think about when it comes to implementations, especially from governmental side or public sector side. As we have the organization with all its policies and processes and procedures in place, then we need to look at the natural resources that is available within the area that resolve to land, infrastructure, labor and material, and of course the labor resources and any other resources. Of course, we will have a project team that needs to get involved in implementing the project and seeing it through to completion. Then we have the direct community, which comes with all the beneficiaries and the needed infrastructure and housing that is required. Then we have the policymakers or the politicians that is within the policy realm that dictate to us how we will do within government structures, how we will do things, what needs to go ahead, what is the critical items, and how we foresee things going forward. As well as when we in the realm, we deal with multiple stakeholders, which is from public sector and private sector. And of course, the only thing that we can utilize to make it happen within the government or public sector is the legislation and procedures and policies that we have that we will elaborate on, and as well as forums like this that deals with research and academia that gives us some direction to where we're going forward within this industry.
Fabio, sorry, your presentation is not full screen and you are not moving. I'm not sure if you are still in the first slide.
Oh, I am not on my first slide. Is everybody else having the same problem?
I think you need to just full screen your slide.
It is full screen on my side.
Do you want I just share from my side?
I think let's just do it that way, just not to waste time for the other.
Sure, let me just. So here your slide. Just let me, which slide you want to just do?
You can go ahead. We pause that one. That one as well. That one as well. And we're on this slide. So this slide deals with a bit of understanding the approach to affordability within the housing sector. The approach is done by Brendan Noord, van der Linden, and Smith. They give a concept of how one needs to look at affordability. Affordability have three approaches, of which of one is currently that the South African human settlements are taking. So the first one that we're going to look at is a housing expenditure to income ratio. I think Keisha have elaborated a little bit on this. This is looking at what is the housing income of a specific household, how much can that household spend on housing, as well as the second one, which is the residential income approach, is looking at the housing affordability in terms of the income as well as the maintenance of how the income ratio of how people can afford and maintain the unit. And of course, we come to the incremental affordable approach, which is the current approach that South Africa is taking in terms of dealing with housing as we accepted over the years since 1994, which I will speak a little bit later about how we transgress to the incremental approach and how it affects our policies and programs. So with this concept, we need to know there's different means of affordability and how we deal with it, because affordability means especially what can a household afford and what is that ratio that they can afford in terms of housing, and that can be defined in further ado. You can move forward, Ali. So just breaking it up down as well, I took it from Brendan Lewis, is the capital viability. There you can see the components that resolve around affordable housing, which is the material housing input, which consists of land, infrastructure, bulk materials, labor, the finance, the down payment requirements, the savings and debits, and the outstanding debts that they have as an individual, which households basically utilize to live and produce a quality of life. On the other side, we have the occupational variable, which consisting of the similar type of nature, but overall the capital variables cost of purchase of a house, which means that if you go out to the market, Keisha have elaborated a lot on that, what is the different cost of housing around the African continent, and that plays a major role. because in each and every country there's different components, even though in fundamentally they're the same, but in terms of the price they differ quite significantly, as well as where they're located. The occupational variable cost is keeping the house up and maintaining it after you have received an house. How do you maintain the house? How you keep up with all the elements of that house that can basically be affordable for that type of family or person that can keep it up. So with that, bringing us to the definition of Tonic in 2008, that defines affordability as the ability to purchase a house unit without exact pressure on the person's finance and resources. Meaning, what can that person afford or provide or give to housing without defining or compromising his quality of life. Keisha mentioned that currently, as per the last report, they identified for 40 square meter house, it cost around about 540,000 in South Africa for entry house when a private developer is building it. Just looking at that, as well as that company 2001 identified that if you take the monthly cost of living for a family within South Africa, it's around about 36,000 rand for a family comprising of four. And if you divide that, it comes, for a single person, it comes to around about 18,000 rand per month. And if we look that into the consideration of what the minimum wage is, which is around 3,500, or just a little bit less than 3,500, we can see there's a far apart that the current nature of what people are dealing with is that they cannot afford a house. Hence, we need the affordable housing regime basically to stand up and become more stronger within terms of policy and procedure as well around the city, because the gap is just growing tremendously and cities will need to adapt to get there. And it's not just an African content problem, as Keisha has identified, is across the board that everybody's struggling with the same initiative. You cannot look at one component of just the cost of a house, but you need to look at its entirety. The next slide, please. So if we look for the definition of affordability within South Africa and in terms of the policy and programs regimes, for interesting sake is that for low-cost housing, we see it as less than 3,500. For affordable housing that we're dealing with, as previously Jackie mentioned, is like from 3,101 to 22,000 and is the affordability bracket. And from 22,201 upwards, that is what we view as high income. So the bracket that we're looking at is 3,501 to 22,000. And as you can see, even that bracket will be struggling to afford a house, which is currently at 540, if we take all the components that they need to look at of what a household needs to maintain. The next slide, please. So after that whole mouthful, I want to bring you just another slide. Is a little bit busy, but just to give you a type of idea of how policies and programs have progressed in terms of where we are and where we are with their evolution. There's a lot of things that happened since 1994, as you guys know. We're not going too much into the political or apartheid regime. Is that we've come out with the National Housing Forum that negotiated some formulation of housing and policy for South Africa. In 1994, the Reconstruction and Development Program was adopted, whereby we could do subsidy housing programs. In 1995 is the implementation of the subsidy program commencing and the National Housing Building, or the NHBRC, progressing. And of course, the big one that everybody refers to when we look at housing is in 1996, the Constitution of South Africa, which basically gives us a whole view of who's responsible for what, and especially Department of Human Settlements that is required to build housing within South Africa. And in 1997, we concluded the Housing Act of 107. And after, I would say, that early 2000, there was tremendous improvement in terms of the housing policy. One of those was the National Housing Code, which introduced us to the various and different housing programs. That housing program sets South Africa on a most entire spill of how to improve housing within South Africa. Even though it's been criticized all the while, it is one of the most significant things of South Africa than putting them at large with the other countries, as in terms of policy, it produces a lot of input as well as giving the government a utilization tool to move forward. So as you can see, with all of that inclusive of how progress have developed, there's case laws as well that have impacted on policies during the years as well. And that one of the most important case laws is the Grootboom case that was implemented in the Blue Moon in 2001 till 2011. And that, to well with the breaking new grants, which brings us to what we're dealing with now, which is in terms of the breaking new grants that affords us to do sustainable housing. So that is when we moved away from only looking at housing as a single unit. So that index significantly I will unpack as well, but it gave us the integration of spatial restructuring, which is seen as being critical and sustainable in human settlements, as well as seeing housing as an asset, not just building a house on its own and leaving it there. We started to look at things totally different and to see how it will help the poverty realm within South Africa as well. And of course, the most importantly, the upgrading of informal settlements were looked at and reviewed as well. And seeing that informal settlements is forming part of cities and towns because we cannot exclude them anymore or eradicate them due to the rapid growth. So there was a new approach in terms of that, which also developed a program. And as well as scaling up the social housing component, where we looked at what we do to approach people that can afford, it's outside the bracket, but earn a little bit less. How can we help them, which we normally call the gap market, and we try to assist them in that way. Further along the line, we had incremental approaches which was developed in post 2010, and as well as the National Development Plan that was in 2012 that also see a larger view of the redevelopment program of South Africa in terms of housing. And in 2014, we introduced the catalytic approach of projects, which is well conceived within South Africa, and I see currently there's a lot of project or mass projects that's being rolled out under this initiative, which is supposed to change the game of how South Africa see housing and develop a little bit more housing in terms of those regimes. In 2015, we had the human settlements that basically drafted a white paper to see what progress have we made to date and how we can tackle the current needs in terms of policy. How can we address the current circumstances of where we are? Because there's a lot of challenges, as we know, within housing. And that is the attempt to draft that new white paper to adapt to the new circumstances that we have. In 2016, there was the transport orientation development within South Africa, or the city of Cape Town specifically, that changed the game in terms of how the city is looked at and how transport or infrastructure imposed on human settlements, and not looking from that specific view of only building a lot of houses or row of houses, but how it influenced cities and towns and how to integrate them all. So that was quite a good initiative in terms of changing the game on seeing how housing is influencing all the elements within human settlements around town. And in 2020, there's a few introductions, and I'll skip that for a little bit later, as that is the new trends that we're looking for. Just the next slide. The next slide just give you an introduction in terms of how policy have produced, once again, in terms of what the deliveries was, in terms of demands, as well as when the current policy changes have happened, and how, as you can see from the diagram, it has increased instead of lowering. But although it cannot be looked in a silo as well as urban, if you look at urbanization in terms of that and the backlog, you will see significant changes in terms of that. And I think Keisha have elaborated and established that with her presentation quite very well, because in South Africa it made quite a difference, and this one only goes up in 2012. But also something to note from this thing is from 1992 and 1994, the policy formulation actually happened within South Africa. That's the early born of South Africa as we know it now. And from 1995 to 2001, the housing sector was primarily driven by the private sector, which means the private sector was on board with the housing developments, and we saw a lot of housing being rolled up until the early 21st century. After the 21st century, the adoption of public sector being responsible for housing delivery have changed the entire game of, hence that's why we need policies and procedures that had to adapt. Hence we had seen the breaking new grants that caused the whole initiative to change and looking for sustainable human settlements of where we are. And from 1994 to 2009, of delivery of human settlements took over, as where we see that just something more than just building a house, but um, public open spaces, we see transport, we see all the other initiatives, schools, etc., that the housing requires around them to basically cultivate the whole entire area or community. Next slide, please. So just thinking about the human settlement, just to give you a perspective in terms of how it influences infrastructure. So human settlements is not unique to South Africa, as I previously mentioned. Policy describes and portrays housing as a holistic environment that consists not only of a house, but include infrastructure and social services. So that means it's an entire city and how it's operates. And as we know, cities are dynamic and it works as a mechanism on its own. And for that, there's different type of items that we need to consider, or elements that we need to consider. Is there residential area, business, industrial, institutional, governmental, movement and networks, open spaces, and agriculture, of course. So looking at human settlement does not consist of how we do housing and building housing, but we need to look at all the elements, as these elements make up the quality of life. Next slide, please. So bringing it into infrastructures, now that we understand that human settlements is inclusive of all of the elements that comprise of a city. The most interesting thing that one can note is that infrastructure have proven to be fundamental driver of social and economic development of cities, as it provides tangible and intangible value opportunity to citizens throughout its life cycle, fabricating the well-being of all that's living within a city. It is good to note that it compromise the quality of life that inclusive of everything. So it's social economics and of course everything that's in the environment. So we cannot look at a house alone. And I think we need to understand it. So building a house and leaving it and giving it to somebody is not going to work, because there's a lot of other elements that plays a role. And that is what the Department of Human Settlements and the public sector have to deal with. Interesting to note, in the McKinsey Global Institutional Infrastructure Productivity Report in 2013 noted that the world needs to invest about $57 trillion in infrastructure throughout 2030 to keep up with the pace of reaching sustainable goals. If we just take that value in terms of South African money, it means around about $154 trillion the world needs just to keep up with the infrastructure and the urbanization amount. Below, I just put in from the latest infrastructure report, what was developed, what is being said currently, what is the investment. In South Africa, we need about 2.3 trillion, and the gap of funding required is about 502 billion. And as you can see below, the sector allocation for projects submitted is that human settlements is the biggest driver of infrastructure, because of the number of houses and opportunities that we need to create within this environment. I just made a note at the bottom as well. Planning and the construction of the large infrastructure projects such as bulk water pipeline, sewage works may take up to 30 years, as much as insultation from the chains and of official political parties. So it takes a long time for infrastructure to be developed. And it is very concerning looking at what our current political regime is in terms of how it operates. What party will take a project up until 30 years? Some of us won't be even here when some of the infrastructure is being done. Move forward. So just looking at how we're tackling infrastructure, this is the City Infrastructure Development System tool that I just put in to just show you that the current National Department of Treasury as well as the CIDB have taken the role on in developing a management system to see how they can implement infrastructure projects within government and rolling it out successfully. And there's various of items that it alludes to, but as you can see, I've highlighted the objectives. I'm not going to dwell into it in terms of time. Moving forward, as well as some, they are also put in all the objectives and all the different standard multiple innovation things that is happening within that infrastructure. So it compromises of practice influences as well as legislation and current manuals and standard that is within the realm of the construction industry. Moving forward. So just showing that the infrastructure, the development of this procurement process over the years, it started in 2003 and is being currently developed until 2016 and currently improving to see how we can roll out mass infrastructure procurement in terms of cultivating, in terms of the catalytic projects that we're doing. What is the bulk infrastructure cities needs as well to improvise and maintain housing as well. Moving forward. So when it comes to human settlement finance, we're talking about land, bulk infrastructure, internal infrastructure, and the housing unit. So coming to the National Housing Code of 2009, I've highlighted all the different housing programs, which is relate to the financial programs, the incremental housing programs, the rural housing program, and the social rental housing programs. I'm not going to dwell into it. All of these programs have significant procedures and place that it needs to have to compromise with, and as well as it provides for different views of different items within cities. So these different circumstances that require different programs to apply. For instance, if there is emergency housing required, there is individual subsidy that is required, that is integrated residential development, that is overall the biggest one out of it all. But the biggest player of it all that we're dealing with is the informal settlements upgrade program that we're all well aware of, and we're going to go forward. Next slide, please. So the core programs is credit link. Jackie previously mentioned it. The credit link is for the individual subsidy that caters for what people can have, and not credit individuals is people earning less than 2,000. So I'm not going to go much into that for the sake of time, but this is the most important of one of this is the three programs that is highlighted is the IRDP program, UISP program, the social and rental housing program. Next slide, please. So just bring it into place when cities look at these things, there's available grants that goes along with these financial regimes. And for all of that, we have the public transport grant, under urban settlements development grant, human settlements development grant, integrated electrical program, the integrated city development grant, and as well as the neighborhood development grant. These housing policies fall into place, and I just put a little picture there to see for what is the utilization of these grants in terms of what elements it caters for. Next slide, please. And just in terms of policy and housing process is quite a significant thing and takes quite long. And previously mentioned, the Constitution have given the three spheres specific roles in terms of housing programs, and these housing programs have to be utilized within national, provincial, and local municipalities. Next slide, please. So just putting it into process from a project management perspective, in implementing a housing project, it takes about 4 years to implement a housing project. This is without having the consideration of any of the internal, municipal, and provincial and national input on a project. So just looking at from a project management point of view, to do all the necessary process, it takes 4 years for one president, regardless of the number of units that needs to be implemented. So one can see from this development, 4 years for a housing project is quite a long time, and it happens in different increments and in different stages of any year and any financial year and other regimes that the municipality need to do. Next slide, please. So municipal complexity and implications, I just put in another slide just to show you within a municipality and within the whole public sector, these different things that is at play, there's different strategies and plans, and as well as outputs that is at play for budget and regimes, and everything has its initial initiative that is not always congruent with the human settlements, but it strives to integrate and implement all. Next slide, please. So within the municipal planning for affecting human settlements, I just displayed there what is the different plans that is at play for human settlements. The biggest one that takes human settlements into account is the integrated plan, which it is the increment of all the other plans, and as well it informs the budget that is available of housing, which direct what service delivery can be done. Next slide, please. Just showing the institutional arrangement as an example that impacts on how policies and structures and government legislation influence on a municipality and what it needs to go through to basically roll out the housing program is, as you can see, the little picture is quite busy. So there's a lot that government needs to do to roll out one project. So as we know, community screams outside. It's not that government can just appoint a contractor and appoint the consultant and say, go build houses. So there's quite a number of processes and procedures that people don't understand that we need to go through. Next slide, please. So there's various challenges in delivering housing process, and I think everybody can add a little bit more. I see some of them in the chats as well. Yes, it's frustrating. There's various of things that we need to look at, but these challenges can be grouped into certain things, but as well we're tackling all of this. And I think the concluding slide will bring a little bit closer to most of the challenges and questions that is there. The next slide, please. So within the city of Cape Town, what is significant that the city of Cape Town has done in the South African realm is they developed a SAP PPM system, which is a project management system that incorporates from a horizontal and a vertical integration of all policies, procedures, everything that one can look that the city needs to manage in terms of its budgets, its strategies, and as well as its business processes of how to implement the project. This is quite a significant thing for the city of Cape Town as we speak now. If anybody wants to know what have the city of Cape Town spent on any project they're currently busy with, this program gives you exactly what the risk, everything that you need to know about the project, and as well as what they determine in the forecast of going forward. Next slide, please. As we know, there's certain gate reviews that also needs to happen. That is a new norm within the project management or within government, where projects needs to be rolled out and checked for what compliance does it have. If it's over a certain value, are government spending the money on the right things? And this is one of the significant things that the PPM system have brought within the Western Cape, I would say, and within the city of Cape Town. Next slide, please. So the human settlement major challenges that we can roll out over the 21st century that we deal with is the continuous urbanization, the overpopulation, population growth, the continuous growth of informal settlements, the land shortage, infrastructure shortage, financial constraints, climate change, materials available, lack of affordable housing, and public institutional policies and procedures that I think practitioners and most of the academia has pointed out. The evolution of the 21st century is the most exciting slide that I think that I put together in a short period of time. It is, if you look at over the time period for the 21st century, from the National Housing Code being developed and the BNG, and from the city PPM structure, there is in 2014, I think it's more where human settlements look at from a spatial planning frame of view of a concept and looking at the different areas. I think Keisha have showed a little map of the different areas and how it cultivates and the CBDs of how affluent and the land capabilities and impacts on the value of that land. In 2015, we had the draft human settlements white paper that is currently being reviewed, and it is developing of a human settlement macro strategy. This is to incorporate all the challenges that we have. Furthermore, we have the Western Cape informal settlement strategy. This is the most important one as we look at taking informal settlement as part of the fabric of a city or within the realm, and not just looking of eradicating them, but making them part of the city by providing them with incremental changes of giving them service sites, which means they have water, basic water and sanitation, and as well as moving them across the long line of in the end of providing or making them capable to build their own house. Moving from that is the city of Cape Town introduced previously the TOD structure, and the urban sustainable unit within the city of Cape Town is currently looking at the carbon hydrant, of the sustainability of housing, and as well as looking at green building infrastructure and housing of how we're doing it, and as well as the Department of Human Settlements was quite influenced by the Department of Performance Monitoring and Evaluation. The Human Settlements Evaluation Synthesis of 2017 sets out the first time for formal theory of change within the human settlements programs. This provided us now to deal with certain things in different manners, as we heard about the catalytic change and of how we can utilize programs in terms of a mixed type of developments of how we can look forward. Then currently, the most important one that is most exciting and sitting within the city of Cape Town is the draft human settlement strategy. This is a total relook of how we look at affordable housing and informality in terms of how we will implement changes in strategies and policies, and looking at how planning approvals, how we're looking at land parcels or urban centers and precincts, of how we can cultivate and implement them a little bit better. And as well as currently the latest one, the most important grant that usually, or the biggest grant that most of the departments and the municipality use, is the USDG Urban Settlements Development Grant. And lately the Department of Human Settlements now in 2020 introduced the Informal Settlements Upgrade Grants, which will be a special grant looking at informal settlements and changing that informality and taking it through to the different increments that it is. And with that, I hope I given a lot of information in a short period of time. No, it's a lot, but I hope it helped to put some things in perspective. But just the whole idea was to show you how integrated and how complex mechanism within public sector one need to deal with to implement projects. And with that, I thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Fabio. All three speakers have given us excellent material to digest. We are very mindful of the fact that we've kind of reached the end and gone over with a couple of minutes. And Ali and I were just sort of brainstorming, and perhaps one of the ideas we could do is to publish the questions that I've collected, and we'll put it on the SIAH's website, on the forum, and we can then take the debate further on that platform. Ali, is that all right?
Yes, of course. So we just try to send the question to all the speakers and the panelists and collect the answer and just put it there. So in the advantage of the people, they're not there or they have other questions, they can also read or add some question.
Excellent. Ali's also just posted on the chat the next workshop, which will be taking place on the 3rd of March. All that remains is just to thank everyone for their attention this afternoon, and once again thank our three speakers who gave us such fascinating information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, especially the speakers, Fabio and the Casey. I just send you the question, and please send me the answer so we can just share and distribute it to all the participants and the people they just interested. Thank you, everybody, and keep safe.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.